This season, there's something we wanted to talk to all of our AC/DC Beyond the Thunder listeners about that's really important to us. As you know, what we do here is free of advertisements, so there's no revenue stream coming into this show. This is strictly a passion project. But if you enjoy the program and you believe in what we're doing, we're asking to donate what you can to each episode of AC/DC Beyond the Thunder podcast. By doing so, you contribute to making dreams come true through the Make-A-Wish and Nordoff Robbins Music Therapy Foundations. And 100% of those profits go directly to these deserving causes. How can you help? Simply go to beyondthethunder.com and hit the charity button before or after listening to each episode, and that's it. Even if you give $1, $2, $5, Greg, Eric, and I would be so thankful, and we salute the AC/DC Beyond the Thunder community for leaning in. That's beyondthethunder.com.
Welcome to Season 4 of AC/DC Beyond the Thunder. Kicking off with an electrifying premiere episode with your thunderous hosts, Kurt Squires, Greg Ferguson, and Eric Cube. Are you ready?
Hello there, it's Season 4 of AC/DC Beyond the Thunder, the one and only podcast that reverberates all of the passion and all of the stories of diversity and damnation from this Rock and Roll Hall of Fame band by the name of AC/DC, who've affected us in truly enlightening ways. I'm your host, Kurt Squires. To my right is Triple G, Mr. Greg Ferguson, along with our mighty rock and roll train engineer, Eric Kielb. Hey guys, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Yeah, let's fire it up.
And Kurt, although in life, most of the time, you're told not to look into the bright light.
That's right.
But today, we're going to ask our brave listeners to ignore that sound advice and embrace the next guest, who, quite frankly, that's all he does. Not to mention a beloved member of the AC/DC family, who's made everything look amazing since 1990. Yes, we're talking about Mr. Charlie Cosmo Wilson.
Yes, and today is finally the day that we get to make him a part of our AC/DC Beyond the Thunder family after trying to track Cosmo down for many months now.
Which makes complete sense because this guy is a true rock and roll nomad. Such a fun-loving soul, and this guy, he is brilliant, pun intended. And what a story Cosmo has to share with our fellow AC/DC fans out there all around the globe. Well, Kurt, I'm psyched. You know, Cosmo's a great guy, and he's going to give us all the ins and outs of touring with AC/DC, lighting. It's going to be a great conversation.
Yeah, and to be inside the circus is always exciting because you're there as a fan, but you're not there to see what they go through. That's something that I think some of us are glad we don't have to because it's a lot of work, right?
Oh, yeah. I can't imagine. I mean, there's so many moving objects for a lighting designer and a lighting director to manage during a show. Like, in Cosmo's style, he does everything in a manual fashion. There's no pre-programmed lighting scenario for each song. He's there, hands on the keyboards, always just kind of keeping up with the song and doing what he does best is making beautiful lighting and just making all of those live AC/DC moments really impactful.
And as we found out, it's more than just light. This guy is sort of an artist, a creative genius. He's coming up with concepts. There's more to it than meets the eye than just a lighting director / designer.
Well, let's get into it, Kurt.
Let's do it. Today, our guest is one of the most award-winning rock lighting directors and designers in the world. He's been involved with approximately 50 bands and events from Black Sabbath to Foreigner, the Scorpions, Van Halen, and major events like the Freddie Mercury tribute concert at Wembley, which means, ladies and gentlemen, that this guy has also lit Spinal Tap. More importantly, Cosmo's been the lighting director and designer on more than 700 shows for AC/DC alone, including several live concert films across 6 different continents. In fact, we might as well start the petition to get AC/DC on Antarctica right now. But in the immortal words of the late, great Bon Scott, who said, "Let there be light," We here at AC/DC Beyond the Thunder, today we say, let there be Cosmo. Charlie Wilson, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's going to be hard to keep up with the introduction, but thank you for that.
Well, we know that you are essentially on the road all the time. So where are you today?
I am at home today, which is unusual. Yes, last year I was on the road 10 months.
Wow.
Unbelievable. You said, speaking of last year, you had a chance to reflect on what an incredible year that was for you. You won 2 Pinnacle Awards for lighting director and designer, and Gateway, your company, winning 3 Pinnacle Awards, on the road nearly, like you said, 300 days working with Slash, Blondie, Journey, Aerosmith, and the mighty Judas Priest, all of which who have been inducted into the Hall of Fame. That's a pretty impressive year.
Yeah, no, it's funny because coming out of the pandemic with nothing to that, it was unexpected, and I got to say I loved every minute of it. It was hard being away from home, but it was fantastic just to be back out there, especially so full force.
I was kind of shocked to see you're quite the Judas Priest fan. That's like almost as equal to AC/DC. I was out there during their induction and we were trading photos, and I'm like, Cosmo, man, this is awesome that you were at that event.
Yeah, I was thrilled to be there for that. I mean, it's I was there at the AC/DC induction back in I think 2003.
Yes,
and it just, there's mixed reviews on the Hall of Fame, but at the end of the day, it's an honor to see bands like Judas Priest get in, and for me to have so many bands to have worked with the Hall of Fame really blows my mind. I would have never thought as 13-year-old Charlie Wilson that I would be working for Rock and Roll Hall of Fame bands.
Well, I wanted to jump back to your 13-year-old self or your teenage self. You said your first concert was Kiss back in '76 when you were a teenager, and you were obviously impressed with the show, but also the spectacle of that show. And then who'd have thought 6 or 7 years later, your first gig would be working for Kiss in Lakeland, Florida. Talk about a full circle.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was, in December 12th, 1976. I remember the date. And back then I wanted to be a rock star, and, I was a guitar player, and Ace Frehley was my idol. And I saw them, and it was the most incredible thing I've ever seen. I mean, it was a little tiny arena in Lakeland, Florida. But it's funny, to this day, the lighting rig hanging from the rafters stood out to me. The guys climbed up ladders to run truss spots stood out to me. But I didn't think about being a lighting guy back then. I just wanted to be a rock star.
And you still have, I think I heard you still have a piece of confetti from that Kiss show. Is that right?
You'll love this. I had bell bottoms with cuffs, so they filled up with confetti. And I've still got the confetti. I've got my ticket stub, and I've got the Kiss poster. It's a foil poster, and it's hanging on the wall over there.
That's perfect. And I remember being that age, going into my room, dressing up like Angus Young, cranking up the music, and putting on a show for myself. But the one thing that was truly remarkable was how light could transform your very own show in your bedroom, whether it be strobe lights or black lights or what have you. Did you ever experience that as a teenager too?
Well, yeah. I mean, I had a black light, and I did enjoy the lighting aspect of it. And my dad was an interior design architect, so we had all kinds of different lighting fixtures and stuff. So I was interested in light then. But yeah, even with after attending rock and roll shows, and I was seeing lights. It's still, at the time, I didn't want to be a lighting designer or director, but I loved playing with lights in my room.
And like most crew members, you originally wanted to be in a band.
Yeah.
So you moved from Florida to New York City.
Yep.
And instead ended up doing a lot of backline work, and you were a drum tech, correct?
Yeah, my first gig, a friend of mine that I went to high school with up there said that a band named Falconetti needed a drum tech, and could I do it? And I said yes, even though I knew nothing about being a drum tech. But I mean, I played in a band, so I was familiar with drums. But I said yes, and I went and worked and got a gig. And
then you eventually, did you just say, I'm done with this, I'm going back to Florida, or did you actually have a gig waiting for you back there?
No. I worked for I'm really good with dates, so excuse me, but May 10th, 1979 was my first gig with the band.
Wow.
And that was Falconetti. And then, I back then you worked for everybody. Once you started working, every band wanted a guitar tech, drum tech, bass tech, keyboard tech. So I started working for any band that would have me in New York, and I was just work nonstop. And I went back to Florida just because it was, the rock and roll at that time. Plus, New York was it was kind of a bad place. Music, rock and roll was just, coming back into vogue from disco. There was a band called The Knack. The Knack? They had the song Maestro. That was in that period of time.
Yep.
I was going back and forth in the early 80s, 79 to the early 80s. And then I just started working locally, and I ended up with a union card and started working any concert I could get because I wanted to go on the road.
And your first touring gig was The Cure as a lighting crew chief, is that right?
What had happened is they were playing, and they did a date in Canada. The two lighting crew were from Britain, and they didn't have work visas for whatever reason. And I got a call from the guy that owned a lighting company in Dallas. What happened is the guys got deported, and they needed crew immediately. So I was one of the guys, and I flew up there, and there was no crew chief and there was no crew. And I just took over. I'd done enough shows by that time that I knew what I was doing, and I always learned. I'm a really good learner. So I just took over, and I ended up as crew chief because there was no one else. So I did a great job. And the next tour I did after that was Genesis.
Which was a huge tour. That was, Genesis in the 80s, they were massive.
Oh, especially Invisible Touch and MTV. The whole combination of that, it was huge. It was the biggest tour of the year. We even flew the Concorde from New York to Paris. It was fantastic.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Which is, I know, one of your hobbies, right? You're into aircrafts and all that.
Well, when I was in high school, I wanted to get out and go to the Air Force Academy, become a fighter pilot. I smoked pot and started playing guitar. So that's the way I went.
It's kind of a fun alternative route, right?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
So that led to eventually the Rolling Stones on their Steel Wheels tour, which I believe Living Colour.
Yep. Oh, they were one of the bands that opened up. We had Guns N' Roses open up in Los Angeles. Talk about a tour.
That's unbelievable. And this is your first gig as a lighting director, correct?
Yeah, I did. I did The Cure into Genesis, and I did The Cure again. I did a few tours in 87, 88, 89. I worked for Barbara Mandrell. I did the NXS Kick Tour, which was another huge tour at the time.
Right.
I did a Crowded House tour. And the Stones started in the summer of 89. At the time, I was a crew chief. There was two separate systems. We called it the red and the blue system, and each one had a crew chief. And then they had the universal team, which went to every gig. The backline guys, sound engineer, lighting director. But what had happened is the lighting director was a guy named Sean Richardson. Unbeknownst to me, he was going to go do Tina Turner. Let me step back for a minute. Generally, guys on the lighting crew run lights for the opening act. So I was one of those guys that started running lights for the opening act, and that's when I realized I loved lighting. I'm an artist anyway, but I loved running lights and calling spots. What was happening beyond my knowledge is that Patrick Woodruff, the overall designer for the Stones, and Sean Richardson, the director and operator, they were grooming me to take over because the show was about 3 hours long. Sean would get up to use the restroom to go pee, and I would sit down for a song or two and run the lights. And I think they saw that I had the talent, and they realized, you know what, he can take over when you leave. So we get to Japan. He's not there, and Patrick Woodruff says, can you run a little bit of the show? We'll split the duties. So he ran part of the first show, and I ran the rest. And second show was combination. I ran more. And then third show, he said, you did a great job. Do you want to take over for the Stones? And so I took over for the Stones after Japan, and we did another 5 or 6 months of touring. So yeah, my first lighting director gig was the Rolling Stones.
Wow. At that point, did you feel like, wow, I'm climbing the ladder really fast? Or do you feel like, no, I put in my dues?
Yes. By that time, I'd been in the business for 10 years, 11 years. Yeah. Couldn't believe I was running lights for the Stones. But on the other hand, I just kind of did it without a thought.
Yeah. Well, Greg and I always have this saying about two things, ability and attitude.
Oh, yeah.
And it seems like those are the two things you have in your back pocket.
Well, that's what I always say. When I'm talking about my lighting crew on a new tour, I say it's 50% attitude and 50% aptitude. I want you to be good at what you're doing, but I want you to be a good person and enjoy it and be happy and positive. And so that combination, I've had guys that are really good at what they do, but they're just assholes, and then you have guys that are really, really nice, but they don't know what they're doing. So you want that happy medium, and that's what I search for in the guys that work with me.
Well, given Keith Richards' love of AC/DC, what a great transition to go to AC/DC after the Stones on the Razor's Edge tour in 1990. What was your reaction to that news of getting that gig?
Well, we were finishing up the Stones tour. We were in Europe. And Patrick Woodruff says, I have a gig after this that you might be interested in. I said, who would that be? He said, how would you like to do AC/DC? And I was like, Oh, you got to be kidding me. I said, of course. Yes, I would love to do AC/DC. So that's how that happened.
Now, is AC/DC more your speed compared to the Rolling
Oh,
Stones?
100%, yeah.
Yeah, I figured so.
I mean, I love the Stones. There's a lot of bands I like, but I prefer heavy rock, hard rock, heavy metal.
Yeah.
AC/DC is not heavy metal, but they're harder rock, and I love, especially guitar rock. And of course, Angus
Yes.
and Malcolm. That's guitar rock.
I had seen an interview with you where you said the first thing that impressed you about AC/DC is that they did a full-blown rehearsal and they played their hearts out to nobody.
Yeah, to nobody. And we did rehearsals in Binghamton and went to Worcester. I was blown away that Angus, the whole band, played like they were playing in front of 20,000 people. And I thought, what a testament to how they care about their craft and taking care of the fans, and as the band used to say, the kids. I mean, it's just that right off the bat showed me, what I was getting into, and it made me so proud.
Do all bands do that?
No, they don't. Not all bands don't do that. I mean, they rehearse, but it was something different about AC/DC. I mean, AC/DC and Angus especially was up there on stage playing his heart out to nobody.
Wow.
It's different. I mean, everybody does rehearsals and stuff, and they play hard and stuff like that. But it was just different. Like I've never seen any band before or since.
You were the first guy to bring moving lights to AC/DC, something that they had never done. Were they open to that? Because they seem like they wouldn't be.
Well, I mean, it was Patrick Woodruff. Patrick Woodruff was there, and we had very light twos and fours. And it was the first. And Angus didn't want them. He said, "They're twinkle lights," But I mean, we also had a bunch of incandescent, the old school par cans. We had big, huge pods.
Yeah.
So it's still a rock show, and the moving lights were more incidental. I mean, there was a lot of them. To this day, this is the thing about old school LDs like myself. I run the show, whether it's moving lights or not. I run it like an old school rock show. It's more a rock show than, as Angus says, twinkly lights. And so we made a rock show for them, and they loved it.
I saw that tour several times, and I remember watching Chris Slade come up from the floor, the strobe lights flickering with the thunder and lightning. What do you remember from that particular tour as something that you brought to the table that was your idea?
Well, the one thing with that tour, and the thing I'm most proud of with AC/DC, is let's go back to Rolling Stones for a minute. So we had inflatables on the Rolling Stones. We had the two girls, and then in Europe we had the dogs. We had different inflatables.
Oh yes, that's right.
So we went out on that, and Patrick had come up with an idea of the Angus face from Highway to Hell, with the horns. And he had a razor blade in his mouth. So it was a combination of Highway to Hell, and the Razor's Edge. And I said, they were doing a whole lot of Rosie. And I said, we need a big, huge, fat, inflatable Rosie. And they were like, oh my God, what a great idea.
Wait, that was your idea, Cosmo?
Yes, it was.
Wow.
That's so cool.
Does anybody know that?
Not really.
They do now. That's amazing. Well, we talked to Chris Slade, who also said that nothing ever went wrong with AC/DC. Can you concur?
Yeah, I've got stories, but no, nothing. No, it's amazing. No, I agree with what he's saying, and yes, nothing goes wrong with AC/DC.
Yeah, I guess he was referring to the clockwork nature of running the show.
I mean, exactly. I mean, everything. Our production manager, Dale Schurseth, Opie.
Yes.
He's been there since 1996. You pay attention. The band, they want you to pay attention. So you always, like Opie says, we take notes from the last tour and carry it over to this tour. It's just in a nutshell, when people talk about me doing lights and how much does the band have to say about lights, and they say some things. Some bands are more in depth, but I guess the point I'm making here is they pay me so they don't have to talk to me about lighting. And what I mean by that is they want to come in and do their craft. They want to play, entertain the fans. They don't want to have to worry about lighting and sound and the set and effects. I mean, of course, they have an input and they talk about it. But once we're there, it's like, I want them to concentrate on doing what they're doing on the stage. And that's what it is. We make it so they can do their show without thinking about anything going wrong.
Not only was that your first tour with AC/DC, but a baptism by fire as lighting director for AC/DC, because they had a Monsters of Rock live in Donington, which is a motion picture, plus the millions of people that showed up in Moscow, which had to be a career highlight for you, correct?
Oh, well, I mean, playing Donington, of course, was an iconic moment in my life to play that, an iconic festival like that. And, it was our tour. It was, I actually have it posted. I know you can't see it on that, but there's that poster
Yes.
there. When the bands that were there, it was an incredible thing doing Donington. With the build up to it, it was probably the second or third tour show on that leg. But yeah, it was an honor for me to do it with AC/DC. But like you said, the whole thing in Moscow, the build up to that, especially with the politics of what had happened with the Russian people, and the mayor of Moscow wanted us there to thank the people for not having a revolution, and it was incredible. That show was incredible. And so many. I mean, I could write a book on that show alone.
Yes, and you should write a book. When is that coming out?
Well, to be honest with you, I mean, I'll give a plug for it. I have written a book, and I'm just editing it now, and I'm hoping to get it out. Probably not this year, but 2024.
That's amazing.
Oh, excellent.
That's fantastic. I'm so glad you did that. What a lot of work.
Well, it's good. I've got a co-writer who's really helped me a lot, and the rock stars that I've talked to about it are all 100% behind me, and that makes me feel so good, which means they trust me.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, the Monsters of Rock, we didn't end the tour there, but we ended Europe there, and then we went to Australia after that, Australia and New Zealand. But yeah, it was, man, to this day, I mean, 1.6 million people were there.
Crazy.
Wow.
I have to think that some really crazy stuff went down in that crowd. Births and deaths and who knows what's going on.
Well, I mean, I've got video from it, and I mean, it was a weird combination of all these, Russians having a great time at a concert. And for instance, you have the barricade, you have the barricade that you put out in the crowd, right?
Yeah.
Well, we had two lines of barricades that went out to the mixed position, but they wanted to there's so many people there, so they had two more barricades of humans. They were a Russian or Soviet militiamen. They had 20,000 Soviet militiamen, and they basically did lines just like barricades. And there was mosh pits going on, and they were beating them with their batons. I mean, it was the most unbelievable and in a way heartbreaking thing. But the kids just kept dancing, and it was incredible.
Wow. Well, I have a question for you. If we were to list an AC/DC tour, let's say chronologically, would you be able to highlight your favorite piece of creative work? So, for instance, if we were to say the Ball Breaker tour, what moment stands out for you that you lent your expertise to?
I can give you two on the Ball Breaker tour. The best one is the beginning of the show when there's this big monolithic wall with gargoyles on it and a big crane with a ball. And that was all done manually. And that ball swinging back and forth. I mean, we didn't know when it was going to hit. It was done manually. So it was just every night it was different and exciting.
Yeah.
And when that ball hit the wall and the wall came tumbling down and Angus comes out from under the back line, oh my God, it was such a great opening of the show. Brian Johnson jumped on that ball and sang Ball Breaker.
Crazy.
And that was, yeah.
He is a crazy man. I love that moment. It's kind of similar to jumping on the bell, but this was being hoisted up onto the ball, and
it was great, and then Miley Cyrus did it years later. It's like, well, Brian did that first.
How about Stiff Upper Lip? Any moments that Cosmo brought that you want to reflect on?
Well, yeah, okay. Stiff Upper Lip, that was having the that statue, the 30-foot Angus statue, that you like the album cover.
Yes, called Junior.
Yeah, Junior, yes. What I came up with that is the band wanted a more exciting entry. So what I came up with was to do a big, huge frame. Like when the football players run on the field and they run through the round circle and burst through the paper?
Yes.
I said, let's do this. Let's do a big, huge frame, and it can burst through the paper just like a football player. And it did, and it was much more impactful.
Yes, I remember the guitar neck going right through the paper.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And the pyro going off. I mean, it was a great effect.
That's awesome. And then, of course, there's the hooking up with the Stones in between tours for the European.
In 2003.
Yeah, the European double bill and the SARS show, which I was at.
Yep.
Any fun little known AC/DC Stones stories there?
The Stones, they'd already had a bunch of dates, but I think these three particular shows were not selling as well. So I think what had happened is Angus and Malcolm had seen the Stones in Australia, and they came up with this. They hatched this idea to open up for 3 shows in Europe. And the cool thing about that is we also did 2 shows. We did them in clubs. It's rare you see AC/DC in a club, but that's another story.
Wow.
But the Stone shows were interesting because it was all they were all three in Germany. You think about it, is it the same crowd? It is and it isn't. I mean, I like both bands. A lot of people like both bands, but it's in some ways a different crowd. So we were intrigued to see the mix of these people. And it was funny, the first show, it was almost like they were, fisticuffs with each other, Stones, AC/DC, Stones, AC/DC.
Right.
We watched them come together because they realized they were both there for the same purpose of seeing bands they loved. But the funniest thing for me the first show is AC/DC went on first. It was still daylight, and you could see Mick and Keith. You could see the Stones standing on the side of the stage watching the show.
Yeah.
And AC/DC went out and kicked ass. I mean, they rocked. I mean, it was one of the greatest shows I've ever seen.
This is Toronto.
And I think the Stones looked at this and said, "Oh shit, we got to follow these guys now." So that show, it's not. I'll just put it this way: it wasn't the best Stone show I ever saw. I mean, it was a great Stone show, but it wasn't the best one. But I'll tell you what, the second one was one of the best Stone shows I've ever seen.
So it upped their game.
Because after that show, they went back and regrouped and said, "Okay, boys, let's go kick some ass." So it was almost a battle of the bands in a good way. Each band made the other better.
That's awesome.
So that was a great 3 shows we did before.
Was Mick kind of intimidated by AC/DC at all?
Well, I don't know, and I wouldn't say they were intimidated. I think they were just shocked at how great they played that first night.
Yeah. And then there was the Black Eyes tour, which sadly was Malcolm's last tour. Were you seeing signs of Mal kind of fading on that tour?
I mean, he did so great during that tour. We didn't really know what was going on. He was still Mal. I mean, sometimes you could notice.
Yeah.
We knew that there was issues and we were concerned about him. But I mean, I was blown away that it was every show was like an AC/DC show.
Oh yeah.
Once we got going, it was great. And I didn't even really think about it.
Yeah.
And at the end of the tour, we found the news that he'd been diagnosed with a form of dementia and stuff. And
yeah,
I saw the band, nearly every night and stuff like that. And he soldiered through, which is what he always did. And, and he made it through to the end of the tour, which after, as I said, after hindsight being 2020, when we found out everything that was going on, we realized, and I just, as I said, I had more respect for the man than ever when he went through that tour and managed to do as well as he did, knowing what we found out later.
Unbelievable. And Greg and I were at the last Rock or Bust show, actually, in Philly. I have to say, one of my favorite moments was a lighting moment, not because you're on the show.
Okay.
When they played Livewire, I actually saw the show in North Carolina when they played it for the first time. The way the stage looked, I think it was blue and green. It was so tasty, elegant, understated, so cool. It was almost as important as hearing that song for the first time in 30 years.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, that's what I attempt to do. I try to enhance the song, and I try to use colors that. I mean, loving the music is helpful because for me, when I love a song, I see colors, and that's what I saw in that song.
Wow, that's interesting. So you see colors for songs?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Well, I mean, there's stuff that makes sense. It's like Foreigner, their song "Cold as Ice." I mean, cold colors are blue and green and lavender and stuff like that. Hot colors are red and amber and yellow and stuff. So I mean, some of it makes sense. I mean, when you talk about a song like "Highway to Hell" is always going to be red and amber.
Yeah.
Because it's flames and stuff like that. But just like "Whole Lot of Roses" has always been pinks and lavenders to me. It's a chick. So I just see colors when I hear, especially music. It's got to be music I like, and it sets the mood. But I thank you for that because I was so happy to hear songs like that.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, I remember Brian saying it's not easy to change a set list, and it affects the crew, it affects the whole touring mechanism.
Yeah.
Can you expound on that? Because I mean, when Axl came in to fill in, it seemed like he was coercing Angus to change up the set list quite often.
Oh yeah.
How did that affect you?
It depends. I mean, my show is not pre-programmed. I mean, I have the set list laid out, and so I have it set so that I go to the next song in the order. But if they go to another song, I just pick that other song and go to it. But it doesn't affect me. It just depends. It depends on if there's an effect in the song. If you have something like, especially with moving lights or trusses, or you have a set piece that changes or a lift that comes up, you have to be careful because they're presetting for that.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like Brian will say the wrong song, and Angus is like, "Once you said it, we're playing it." And as I said, I just have to click that song and start running it.
Well, that's good. You do it manual. Actually, I've watched you during an AC/DC show, and folks, I got to tell you, if you ever see Cosmo during an AC/DC set or any show, it looks like he's actually a band member because the way he's punching the board is like a keyboard almost. And if AC/DC were to ever have a keyboard player, which will never happen, but it's almost like you are the sixth member because you're doing it live, it's manual, and it's like you're working as hard as the band.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate you notice a lot of people come to me after the show and say, "Wow, you were playing like you were playing with the band." And I always say that, I mean, I have a keyboard or console. Instead of sound coming out, light comes out. So it's the same kind of thing, and that's the one reason classic rock bands like me, and the reason I like classic rock bands is because it's not, it's not pre-recorded, it's not Pro Tools, it's them playing, and especially with a band like Aerosmith, who I don't mean this in a derogatory term, sloppy. I mean it, but I mean good sloppy. They play and they jam and they change.
Yes.
The only way you can do that is if you run it manually. So I appreciate what you're saying about, obviously I'm not a member of the band, but I'm still playing along with them like I'm playing it.
Well, how long does it take you to set up for an AC/DC show?
In terms of on a daily basis or preparing for the tour?
On a daily basis on the road.
Well, I mean, like I said before with Opie and the team that we have, generally, it's a long day. I mean, the rigging guys are in at 6 or 7 in the morning. Lighting guys are in at 8, but I mean, the rig is up in the air and everything's ready to go by 1 or 2 in the afternoon.
Wow.
So it's a lot of thought goes into the design as part of that as well to make sure it goes up quickly.
Yep.
But we've done shows where we've loaded in at 4 in the afternoon and still been up in time for showtime.
Greg's more of the technical guy. Greg, did you have any technical questions?
One question is like, how do you, when you have a tour that's going from continent to continent, how do you deal with that? You don't carry all your gear with you, but do you have a new set in a new country?
Well, no. I mean, it depends. I mean, let's talk about AC/DC because AC/DC is different. I wanted to. Can I expound on something for a second here? Let's take two bands. Let's take the Scorpions, who I worked for about 12 years, and AC/DC. AC/DC is it's important to them to bring the show to the kids. The whole full production. They don't want anybody to see anything less than another kid or another fan saw in another place. They want to make sure that they get the full entire 100% package. What that does, though, is makes it logistically difficult to do small towns and hamlets and far reaches. You know what I'm saying? Certain small places, it's very, very expensive. Not that we couldn't get there, but it's very expensive to get there.
Yeah.
A lot of logistical expense and also just complications. Now on the other side, the Scorpions, they like their production. They've always, but not as big as AC/DC. But their whole thing is bringing the music to as many kids as they can, as many fans as they can. So I see both sides, but I appreciate AC/DC because AC/DC's always been known for their over-the-top production. So to give anything less than that would short sale the people who come to see the show. So I appreciate that. We did in, I think it was 96 or 2000. We went to Japan from Australia, and we couldn't bring everything just because everything had to be air freighted. So I had to augment some stuff with different lighting in Japan, and we did it. It was fine. It worked. That was the only time we've ever done anything like that. But we bring everything everywhere. We either put it in containers and ship it across the ocean, or they air freight it, which is obviously stupidly expensive, especially these days.
Right.
But I mean, when I work with Aerosmith, we don't bring everything. We get augmented by local lighting, sound, and video companies. Here's the thing: it's more doable now because more countries have more gear, so they can, facilitate our needs. But AC/DC has always been about bringing everything because they know it works. And I love that, and I appreciate that, and they go to great expense to make sure that happens. So that just attests to how they feel about taking care of the fans.
Your first lighting design gig for a tour was David Lee Roth, I believe, who is very complimentary of your work. And now, all these years later, how do you present to bands like AC/DC? Is it a full-blown presentation? Is it on a napkin?
Pretty much, they still start on napkins or a piece of blank type, printing, copy paper.
Yeah.
I mean, with AC/DC, I've worked with Patrick Woodruff for many years. We worked together on the Stones, obviously, and he's the overall designer of the lights and the, we come up with a concept, we talk about things, we talk to the band, first of all, we get the name of the album and what the context of the album is, and try to work that into the show, not just the lighting design, but the set design, the video content. And as I said previously, some bands have more input, other bands have less. With AC/DC, we talk about it in the beginning and get the concept down, and then me and Patrick run with it, and we just do it. And then basically, in a situation like this, Patrick would go and present it to the band. It's like we just did a thing. I did a thing with Aerosmith's 50th anniversary in Fenway, and we had Amy Tinkham was basically the production designer. We were presenting to the band, and I said, "You present it to the band. It needs to be one person, and that's it doesn't need to be a whole gaggle of people with the band. It needs to be one person who can look at them and ask and answer questions." And that's how it works with Patrick Woodruff. And then he just gives it to me and says, "Here we go."
Who from AC/DC do you deal with the most?
Well, it used to be Malcolm. Now it's Angus.
Yeah.
He's the one who wants to know, and he's the one you present things to and ask things about. And he comes up with ideas.
Yep.
I'll come up with an idea and I'll present it to him, and he kind of lets us run with it. We've been there so long that he trusts us. And like I said, back to what I said at the beginning, he pays me so he doesn't have to talk about it.
Yeah. Right. Right. Peace of mind.
Yes.
So we had heard that Power Up was ready to go. It was, they had the video shoot. Was everything ready as far as props and schedule and set list? How far down the mix did you get?
Well, no, we were, as far from my point of view, we hadn't gone anywhere with it. I mean, it was talked about. I'd heard that we were, a date range. I never learned anything more than that because COVID happened. I mean, I was hoping that we were going to go out the end of 2020.
Yep.
So.
Were you ever called, or are you ever called in for video shoots?
Rarely.
Yep.
Rarely. Yeah. Most video shoots, the only time I'd be called in for a video shoot if they were shooting on the tour. Like we did Money Talks. We did that in Philadelphia.
Oh, right. It's more of a live.
Stuff like that. Whenever we're on tour and they want to do a video, then I obviously come in and run the lights for it.
Right. We wanted a little fun section. We know Angus Young has his schoolboy uniform. Brian has his English working cap. And you, Cosmo, hailing from Florida, and your happy-go-lucky attitude, have your signature Hawaiian shirts. So we also are wearing Hawaiian shirts in honor of you today. And we know that you have, would you say, over 300?
Yeah, I used to have one for every day of the year, but I had to cut back. It was just too many.
So we got to ask, have you ever gifted a Hawaiian shirt to the members of AC/DC?
No, I've gifted them before, but not to the members of AC/DC.
Okay.
I think Angus would look good in one on the beach in Australia.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the Cosmo style AC/DC Hawaiian shirt on their website. Haven't seen it yet, but so your given birth name is Charlie, correct?
Yes, Charles.
When and where did you acquire the loving nickname of Cosmo?
I'll try to give you the condensed version. When I started working for the union as we know, when I worked for KISS, was one of my first concert in Lakeland. They had the Miss USA pageant signed a contract with Lakeland Civic Center to do 3 shows down there. They did Miss Teen USA, I think, in '83. Then '84 and '85, they did Miss USA pageants. And at the time, there was a New York stagehand who was a head carpenter, and I worked with him directly because I was a carpenter on for the local union. And he was one of these New York guys. He would just he would call everybody something, his first thing he called me was Rasputin. He goes, "Yo, Rasputin, hand me that board over there." So he named me that, and then a few days later he called me Cosmo Brown. And it's just some New York guy calling everybody different nicknames. So a few days later he said to me, "I give everybody nicknames because they work hard for me and I like them."
Ah.
He says, "You've reached my second tier." He's trying to motivate me. And he says, "If you continue to work hard like you're doing, I'm going to give you another name." So I worked really hard the next week. So finally, a few days later, he says to me, "All right, you reached my third plateau." And I said, "Awesome." He says, "You got to do one more thing for me." And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Tell me the nickname I gave you." And I said, "Shit, I can't remember." He said, "All right." He says, "You reached the third plateau, but you're going to be Cosmo Brown." I said, "Okay." So I had a few guys on my local, the local calling me Cosmos, Cosmo Brown, stuff like that. Fast forward a couple of years later, 1986, I'm out on Genesis. I'm on the lighting crew. We have a guy who's our crew chief and head rigger. His name is Charlie Boxhall. And Morris Lyda, it's funny, Morris Lyda, who was the production manager of Genesis, he doesn't remember this, but he says, we can't have two Charlies on the lighting crew.
Ah.
He says, since you're the new guy, you need to come up with a nickname or we're going to give one to you. And I'm like, boy, I do not want somebody giving me a nickname.
Right.
So something like Spermhead or God only knows what. So I said Cosmo, and he said, all right, Cosmo it is.
Oh, brilliant.
And that's where it started. And I actually had it legally changed in 2000 just because everybody knew me as Cosmo.
Really?
Yeah.
That's fantastic. I
That's
didn't know
cool.
that. Wow. Well, Cosmo, we've done some digging, and we know, other than being a lighting aficionado, your hobbies include cooking, eating, guns, fishing, gardening, airplane models, and air shows. And we know this because you're such a prolific soul on social media. But we also noticed a photo of your office and what it looks like after you've been on the road for weeks on end, with mail spilling all over your desk. And we were wondering if we could play I Spy with that photo.
Oh, sure.
Okay. We saw a bunch of Rubik's Cubes. Can you explain that?
I love Rubik cubes. I love the original ones just because they're iconic. I still have a couple still in the original box, and it's got to be a Rubik's cube.
Okay.
When they first came out, I learned to solve them. I'm not some genius that can solve them. I had to think. You learn the algorithms and stuff like that. So the ones on my desk, I have a couple in there called speed cubes, and they're fast. They're easy to move. Because sometimes they just get jammed.
Yes.
These move good. So I don't do it every day, but before I start something, I take it and I mess it all up, and then I solve it. And what I think it does is it kind of settles my brain down.
Okay. We also saw a photo of Ronald Reagan.
Every politician does good and bad, but I like Ronald Reagan a lot. I respected him as president. I mean, that was at that time, was right in the beginning of good hard rock and heavy metal in 1980. And in my life there was a lot of change. I mean, mostly for the positive. With him as president, and I like Ronald Reagan a lot. It was my first time in Germany when he was president, and I was there right after he said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." And
yes,
that made a huge impact on me.
Of course,
seeing that change.
What else did we see? We saw a somber Malcolm Young's funeral invite.
Yep, it's their family, and I mean, I went down to Australia. There's certain people that I will not miss their funeral. I don't care how far I have to travel.
Yeah.
So I went down to that, and they had those there, and I just love that photo of him.
Yeah.
And I just put it on my desk there. It's funny. I look at it every day, and I get strength from him.
Really nice. We also saw a copy of Air and Space magazine.
I get so many magazines, and they all sit there unread for months, and I get home and I'll go through them, and they just stack up. But yeah, I love all that stuff.
And what else can we? Sorry, hopefully we're not feeling too much like creepers here, but we saw
no, it's all good.
A signed photo of a St. Louis card from Tony La Russa. So you got to be a baseball guy.
Yeah, that's my favorite major sport is baseball. I mean, and it's funny. I have 4 teams I like. I like the Cubs, the Mets, the Braves, and the Marlins. And it obviously has to do with proximity. The first game I saw was in 1968 was the Cubs because I grew up in Chicago. Living in Florida, the only team when I was a kid was the Braves. I saw Hank Aaron hit his 700th home run with my grandfather.
Wow.
Here's the thing. Like a lot of celebrities and sports stars, and they like to come in to see shows, especially AC/DC. So Tony La Russa, we had a mutual friend, and Tony wanted to come see. I think it was the Scorpions at the time. He's been to see AC/DC, but
oh, nice.
One thing I do is I put my headset. I have a headset that I talk to my spots in. Well, I have a spare one, and I'll kind of put it on people that kind of knew that they don't know what I'm doing or I'm talking to, so they'll listen to me call spots. So he listened to it for a little while, then he gave it to his wife, and she was like, "That's more exciting than the World Series." I'm like, "I don't think so, but thank you." But Tony just had a great time, and he's been to a lot of my shows, and he's just such a great guy. And I just he gave me that photo and a signed baseball.
Oh, that's cool. That must have been a thrill for you because I was at the show too when AC/DC played Wrigley.
Oh, that was incredible. Sitting in the whole thing about it. I mean, I still got some ivy. I stole some.
Oh,
ivy.
good for you.
Wow.
So are you going to spill the beans for us when they're going to release that show? Because I saw cameras there.
Oh, well, I know. I wish I knew. Believe me, I would love to see that show.
Yeah.
Exactly. An iconic show, and Wrigley Field. all places.
Well, speaking of being on the road, when you get a call from AC/DC that they're about to hit the road, is there ever a conflict with your schedule, or do you know way ahead of time?
There's conflicts,
Yeah.
but I mean, one caveat: whenever a band asks me for the first time to work with them, my caveat is, listen, when AC/DC goes out, I go out with AC/DC.
Right.
And of course, they'll say, well, when are they going out? I'm like, I don't know. When I started Aerosmith, I told Steven and the band, I said, when AC/DC, they said, okay, is there anything looming? I said, no, there's nothing. So, and then in 2014, I was going to miss just one leg of Aerosmith, and told Steven, and he was like, what? You can't leave. I said, I told you this. He goes, I know you told me this. He says, but and I got a very good replacement for me, and he did the run great, and Steven was happy, and then I came back after the AC/DC leg finished, and then Aerosmith was done for till the next tour.
That's awesome. One of my favorite parts of the Let There Be Rock film is at the very beginning with all the crew. They're setting up the show, eating together, and all these years later, well, just 10 years later, you'd be joining this huge AC/DC family. Tell us about some of the veteran crew members. There's like 60 people on this show, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, it's core crew is probably about 60, because you start throwing truck drivers and bus drivers in there and staging guys. I mean, you're into 200 or 300,
right?
But the core crew is about 60. We generally have about 6 or 7 buses with about 8 to 10 people on each bus. But as far as the core crew goes, you have your engineers, front of house sound, lighting, monitors. You have your backline guys, drum tech, guitar tech. You have stage managers and production managers. But it's funny, since I started in 1990. Since that time, there's 3 of us left.
Wow. What is your seniority treatment like then?
Well, I mean, I don't know. No, it's weird. It's like, it's not really like this. I mean, obviously everybody has their
levels,
like you said, seniority, and they've been there, but we're all such a family. You don't think about it. We're all taken care of. I mean, Opie, there's been a lot of guys that have been there since 96. The sound engineer, Pab, has been there since 96. The guy that's been there the longest is Dickie Jones, and he's the drum tech, and he's been there since 1980.
Wow.
Since Back in Black.
That's nuts.
And he's still there. And Chris Dieters, who is the stage manager, Super Chris, as he's known, he's been there on and off, but he's been there, I think, since 84, 83 or somewhere.
Wow.
And he's left to do other things, but he comes back every tour now.
Well, the cool thing we've heard about you, Cosmo, is that you're famous for making day off sheets, which is exactly what it sounds like. Essentially a fun list of things to do for the crew on their day off. So we wanted to know if we could ask you a couple of rapid fire questions based on that.
Okay, I'll try.
Okay, what's the most beautiful place you've ever traveled to?
Okay, there's two places for different reasons. Can I?
Yes.
Is that okay with you? The first time I went to Munich, Germany, to the Marienplatz, which is the square in the center. It was 1987. I was there with Genesis, and I was blown away. I felt like it was home to me. And that whole area of Bavaria with the mountains, but the city of Munich is just an incredibly beautiful place. But as far as natural beauty, there's a place outside. It's between Sao Paulo, Brazil, and Santos, Brazil, near the coast, and it's in the rainforest, and it is the most far away, incredibly gorgeous. There's waterfalls and rainforest. It's just one of my favorite places on earth. But I got to say, the Grand Canyon is one of my favorite places to go, because it's such an amazing place.
Yes, absolutely. Greg, did you want to jump in and ask a couple of these questions?
Sure. Favorite food on the road?
I'll eat a cheesesteak in Philly. I'll eat a bratwurst in Munich. I mean, when I get into a city or country that I've not been to before, the first thing I do is I go to the concierge to talk about restaurants. And of course, they tell me this posh place and that posh place, and I say, no, where would you go to eat? Then they go, and they say this little place around the corner is down here.
Smart.
And that's where I go. But my as I said, my favorite food is generally the local cuisine. Go a little tangent here, but the one cool thing about traveling is I found that we're all the same. We want to entertain and show. We want to cook for people. We want them to taste our cuisines and our liquor and see the sights. They you're proud of where you're from.
How about favorite people, favorite culture?
Oh, I'll tell you right now, I mean, I love everybody everywhere, but if you ask me, the one place where I was most blown away by the people is Basque Country in Spain, northern Spain.
Oh.
But I went out and I met a guy in a bar, and we went bar hopping, and we picked up people that were friends along the way. And we ended up in this bar that one of them owned, and I'm still friends to this day with those people.
Wow.
And they're like, I cannot tell you how incredible they are and the hearts they have and the honesty. They are salt of the earth, and
That's so fun.
So you guys are city to city all the time. What city does your crew have the most fun in?
Well, back in the day, it was Amsterdam because everything was legal there. Pot and mainly pot. Everybody wanted to get stoned, but any city in Europe is fun. I mean, for the most part, everybody wants to go see things. That's why I do day off shoots, because I want to get people out. Don't forget why we're touring. I tell them, it's great being how to doing a job, but one of the perks of our job is being able to see all these different places and meet different people and cuisines and cultures.
How about the biggest AC/DC fans?
Oh my God. I would say, I mean, everywhere. It's amazing how AC/DC has fans everywhere. But I mean, you look at where we've done videos, and that tells you a lot, because we don't just arbitrarily pick a place to do a show. The band say,
Right.
let's do a show here, do a show there. I got to say, the show we did in Buenos Aires,
Yeah.
I mean, you've seen the video, live at River Plate. I mean, my God, that crowd was amazing.
Insane.
But we did the Bull Ring in Madrid. That was another amazing show.
Right.
The Germans are, manic about AC/DC.
Yes. Can't leave out the Germans.
Yeah, it's the Australians. I mean, but I got to say that the Buenos Aires show to this day was one of the most amazing shows I've ever seen, and I got to say the film shows it.
Yes.
It really, really, they caught it. David Mallet caught the fans in a great way on that movie.
Yes, he did. Last one, Greg?
Yeah, so we have the benefit of doing a video call with you, so we get to see you in your office there. I see a lot of cool AC/DC mementos that you have in there. What is the most prized AC/DC possession that you do have from touring?
Oh man, probably the most prized possession. I mean, I got a lot. You can imagine, I've got a lot of AC/DC things. I've got stuff from shows. It's just I got memorabilia, jackets and shirts and posters. I get guitar picks and drumsticks and very personal things. But I got to say, the most amazing thing I have, and it's without a doubt, there used to be a guy named Pete who would bring guitars to Angus. And sadly, he was killed in a car accident in the mid-'90s. But he came out in 1990 or 91. And he would bring a selection of SGs to Angus, because he knew what Angus liked, and Angus trusted him. He had this one guitar, which was an SG, but the original SG wasn't called the SG. It was called a Les Paul Custom. At the end of the day, Les Paul didn't like it. He didn't like the design of it. He didn't want his name on it. So they changed it to SG. But the first one was called Les Paul Custom, and it was white. 1961, had a gold hardware on it. Peter brought this guitar to Angus, and it was light and beautiful. I mean, the guitar was beat up. All the hardware wasn't on it. Angus loved it, but it was all original. And he said, I love it, but I can't paint it. I'm not going to play a white guitar, because he doesn't play white guitars. And I was there, and we're looking at the guitar, and he said, that's a 61. I guess that's the same year I was born. And he looked at the guitar, and he looked at me, and he handed it to me.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
The same year as your birth, it's yours. And basically he gave it to me, and I got him to sign it, and it's my prized possession to this day. So.
That's fantastic.
Wow, that must mean a lot.
It does.
When you're off the road, do you have any examples of amazing moments you shared with an AC/DC member or members that you don't mind sharing with listeners?
Well, no, I appreciate that. I mean, I get it's funny. There's two Brian Johnsons to me. I mean, Brian lives in Florida, and I go to his house, hang out with him, and he loves sports, and he loves to cook, and he loves to eat. We go out and eat. We barbecue. He's a lot of fun to hang out with. And there's two Brian Johnsons. There's Brian Johnson, the lead singer for AC/DC, this idol guy, this iconic singer. And there's Brian Johnson, my friend. And it's just this weird thing. And I always have to
switch it off.
Yeah, this is Brian Johnson, the singer for AC/DC. No, it's my friend. And we hang out. And the one thing about AC/DC, unlike most musicians, I'm not saying anything bad about any other musicians, but AC/DC are so down to earth and so normal, regular guys. They're not rock star, they're not pretentious. They don't, I mean, of course they all live and enjoy their lives, but they're not, it's hard to explain. They're so down to earth. They're just basic guys. And when I'm with Brian, I forget that he's the singer for AC/DC.
Right.
When
was the first time you saw AC/DC, by the way?
1980.
Okay, so you saw the Back in Black tour. Do you have a favorite AC/DC album after Back in Black?
After Back in Black.
Everyone talks about the Back in Black and before,
Well, yeah, I mean, I love Power Age. I mean, obviously Razor's Edge was a great album.
Yeah.
Fly in the Wall, Flick of the Switch. they're okay albums. I don't listen to them. I'll tell you what, I like listening to stuff now that they don't play.
Yeah.
Because not that I'm tired of hearing them play, but it's just nice hearing other stuff as well. I don't know. I would say Razor's Edge is probably my favorite album after that. But I mean, I've loved everything that. I mean, Black Ice is probably the next one.
Yeah.
I mean, that had so many great songs on it. And the new one though, the tribute to Malcolm on it is just pulls your heartstrings.
Yes.
It's funny how they manage to pump out these albums and still have 2 or 3 stunningly great songs on. I'm not saying the others aren't, but you know what I mean. They're just
Right. They're always going to be there. Do you have a favorite AC/DC track that you've always wanted to lit? Like, hey, can we throw this in the set list?
my favorite song to run is "Shoot to Thrill." It's my favorite song to run.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have said that before, but my favorite AC/DC song, God, there's so many, but Sin City is a longtime favorite for me.
Yeah.
I don't think we did it for a couple of tours and then it came back again, and it's such a great song for me to run. It's something I always wanted to run.
It's a classic, yeah. Cosmo, AC/DC Beyond the Thunder is about how this one band's music, style, attitude has influenced so many different people in incredibly profound ways. And although you've worked with around 50 unique acts, how would you say AC/DC has affected your life?
Well, and I've said this to each band member. I mean, obviously they affected my life when I was young. When I heard Highway to Hell and High Voltage. I mean, and then Back in Black changed my life. And I've said this directly to Angus, you guys are you've been the soundtrack of my life. Obviously, everybody has songs that remind them of something that happened in their life, good, bad, summer they had. AC/DC, just from listening to them in my youth and then working for them and getting to know them, to me, I mean, they're the most influential band in my life, for 2 reasons, because of the music they've put out, and my relationship with the band and running lights for them.
What does light mean to you? How does light affect us as humans?
The one thing I like to be careful with when I do shows in I want the lights to augment. I don't want it to take away. I mean, the first thing I do is light the band. The reason the people are there is to see the band. So the first thing I do is light the band, and then everything else is just an enhancement. I don't necessarily want people to walk away and go, what a great light show. I want people to walk away and say, what a great show.
Right. I think you had called out Oslo, Norway in 91 during the Razor's Edge tour. That something special happened. Can you describe that?
That was the first time. I mean, we'd been out for a little while, but just with that one show, everything, it's hard to explain. You really can't explain it unless you're there. Everything was just gelling, for lack of, the cliche, everything gelled. But it really did. It was between the band playing and the crowd and the lights and the sound and everything together. It was just, all of a sudden, it was like we were all one.
Perfect.
It was just amazing. I mean, I'm getting chill bumps thinking about that one show, and I've had a few since then, but that was the first time I'd really experienced that. I can't explain it. It was just, everybody was feeding off of everybody else.
What's your prediction for AC/DC's future?
Well, I mean, Angus, it's funny. You'll love this. In 1990, when they were doing the Razor's Edge tour, they were doing a press conference, and I wasn't doing it. I was there, and they asked the band, "Is this the last AC/DC tour?" 1990. And Malcolm laughed, and he goes, "No, it's just another tour." He said, "Well, how long do you think you'll tour?" And that's been asked a lot of times. And Angus's general answer is, until we can't fill arenas, until we feel like we can't play anyone. As long as we have fans, we're going to tour. So it's never the last tour. I don't foresee AC/DC doing the final farewell tour or anything. They're just going to tour. That's what they do. It's a drag that we haven't toured in 6 years, but with the pandemic and everything.
Right.
And
well, with the 50th anniversary, fingers are crossed, and we'll be there for sure. And maybe we can buy you a drink too.
I would love that. And I don't know. I mean, AC/DC surprised me. Like, I don't know if they'll do an official 50th anniversary tour. I think they'll just do another tour.
Yeah.
I'm hoping they do. We'll see. The last tour wasn't the last tour. It was a tour.
Right.
So.
Well, we mentioned before that the crew can sometimes be frustrated musicians.
Yeah.
Knowing what you know now, would you rather be in a band or still in the crew?
I love what I do now. Although, as a musician, you want to create. I would have loved to go back and create music. But on the other hand, I like I love what I do right now. And rock stars, okay, they're rich, and it's a hard life sometimes, and there's a lot of pressures. And I always say I feel my life. I feel like a rock star, but I don't have to give interviews.
Right.
So
Right. You don't have that baggage.
yeah, exactly. And I don't get recognized in public, and my life's not out there, for everybody to see, and drug problems and alcohol problems and marital problems or whatever. And so it's I like to, as I always say, I do my job on the dark side of the arena.
Well, congrats on the new biz, by the way. It looks like you've got Gateway is just cranking this new facility.
Gateway's a great company. I mean, the combination, obviously it's about the studios they're building, and I really hope that one day AC/DCs were doing rehearsals in there. But the fact that they've created a lighting, sound, and video company, and they brought me in originally to help put together the lighting company, which meant a lot to me. Because that's how I started. My roots are, working as a lighting crew guy.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Cosmo, you're such a shining light, an incredible inspiration, one Hall of Fame rock and roll lighting guy. We salute you, your AC/DC Road Crew family members, and thanks so much for being on AC/DC Beyond the Thunder.
The thing I like about this show is it shows this love that people have for AC/DC from all walks of life.
Yes.
And it's very obvious in looking at all the different people you've had over the years.
Before we let you go, before we flick the switch, I should say, we have our final question that we ask all our guests. If you had to describe AC/DC in one word, what would yours be, Cosmo?
Oh boy, it's actually when you said that, the first word that came to my mind was rock.
Rock. AC/DC Beyond the Thunder theme song, Trailer Trash, written and performed by Gannon Arnold. VO talent by Bruce Jacobson. Cinematography and sound recording by Greg Ferguson. Edited and mixed by Eric Keel. Written, directed, and hosted by Kurt Squires. Produced by Greg Ferguson, Eric Keel, and Kurt Squires. AC/DC Beyond the Thunder is a Squires LLC current motion production. Copyright Beyond the Thunder podcast. All rights reserved. This has been a Nat Attack presentation.
Shazbot Nanu Nana.
This season, there's something we wanted to talk to all of our AC/DC Beyond the Thunder listeners about that's really important to us. As you know, what we do here is free of advertisements, so there's no revenue stream coming into this show. This is strictly a passion project. But if you enjoy the program and you believe in what we're doing, we're asking to donate what you can to each episode of AC/DC Beyond the Thunder podcast. By doing so, you contribute to making dreams come true through the Make-A-Wish and Nordoff Robbins Music Therapy Foundations. And 100% of those profits go directly to these deserving causes. How can you help? Simply go to beyondthethunder.com and hit the charity button before or after listening to each episode, and that's it. Even if you give $1, $2, $5, Greg, Eric, and I would be so thankful, and we salute the AC/DC Beyond the Thunder community for leaning in. That's beyondthethunder.com.